Good morning. I just want to share some of the thoughts that we shared on Sunday. Sometimes it helps me to hear them a second time and to go over it, so maybe it will to you too. We read from the book of John, chapter 21, and we just read verses 15 to 17. You'll remember last week we read about Jesus coming and finding some of them by the lake and about the big catch of fish. Verse 15 of John 21, and I'm reading from the New International Version, and it says, "When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?' 'Yes, Lord,' he said, 'you know I love you.' Jesus said, 'Feed my lambs.' Again Jesus said, 'Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?' He answered, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' Jesus said, 'Take care of my sheep.' The third time he said to him, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, 'Do you love me?' He said, 'Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you.' And Jesus said, 'Feed my sheep.'" Now we're going to go back to the book of Mark, chapter 14. And let's remember, 14 beginning at verse 27. This was before Jesus was crucified. And Jesus told his disciples, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." "I tell you the truth," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will deny me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the others said the same. Now we're going to go to the book of Luke, chapter 22, and beginning at verse 52. Luke 22:52. "So when they had come to arrest Jesus, he said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, 'Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns.' Then seizing him, they led him away and took him to the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. But when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, 'This man was with him.' But he denied it. 'Woman, I don't know him.' A little later, someone else saw him and said, 'You also are one of them.' 'Man, I am not,' Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, 'Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean.' Peter replied, 'Man, I don't know what you're talking about.' Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. 'Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly." William Barclay says the penalty of sin is to face not the anger of Jesus, but the heartbreak in his eyes. And I wonder how many times I've caused that heartbreak in Jesus' eyes. But let's get back to the question at hand in John chapter 21. Do you truly love me more than these? Now, why would Jesus ask Peter this? He could have been asking about, Peter, do you love me more than your fishing boat and the nets and this? Are you going back to your former life, or will you continue to follow me? And that might be a question we hear lots of times too. Is there such a pull from our former life, or are we going to stay the course and stay on this new path and continue to follow Jesus? So that's a very real possibility for this question. He also might have been saying, do you love me more than these others do? Now, Jesus doesn't make comparisons, but sometimes we do, don't we? Have you ever thought, or maybe you've never done this, but maybe you've heard someone say, I know I don't love Christ as much as I could, but at least I love him more than so-and-so. We are not meant to measure our love in this way. And Jesus doesn't. In fact, he's the only one that would know how much we love him compared to so-and-so. So why, again, would Jesus ask Peter this? Well, do you remember Peter's words? Even if everyone else disowns you, I never will. Jesus is not asking Peter to compare his love to others, but he's inviting Peter to move from his place of pride to a place of humility, the reality of what his love for Jesus really is. Because only from humility can Peter's relationship with Jesus be truly restored. Only from humility can our relationship with Jesus be a true one too, right? Jesus gives Peter 3 opportunities to renounce his 3 denials. And despite Peter's failures, Peter wants Jesus. He wants to love Jesus with every part of himself, and he knows that his love is not deep and full like he would like it to be, or like Jesus would like it to be. But Jesus does not reject what Peter can offer. He takes Peter's offering of a little bit of love and knows that with his love, he will make that love into something glorious. So, what about us? Well, might we be like Peter too? Maybe not verbally denying that we know Jesus, but do we sometimes seek to separate ourselves from him by quietly blending in with those who maybe oppose? Do we sit with the crowd rather than stand up and stand out for Jesus? Every day Peter would hear the roosters, and he could be tempted to remember his failure and the pain on Jesus' face, right? But Peter represents hope for all of us of God's transforming grace. Jesus does not merely overlook our sin, but because of his sacrifice, because of his grace, we can be forgiven and enter into a relationship with him that is above and beyond anything that we could know or imagine. Let's look in Deuteronomy chapter 6 for a minute. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. And the first verses 4 to 6 says this. Hear, O Israel. Hear, O Ingerman. Hear, O wherever you are. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Now let's turn back to that book of Luke, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And remember, Luke was a doctor that traveled with the Apostle Paul. In Luke chapter 10, beginning at verse 25, An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" Jesus replied. The man answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus replied, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Jesus said that this was the first and greatest commandment. In 1 John 4:19, it says, "We love because he first loved us." God never intended us to work up this love for him out of our own effort. We are not capable of that. God's intention for any command is that he himself would come to meet that demand for us. Our love for God and others actually originates from God himself. 1 John again, chapter 4 again, and we have been learning these verses, so you should know this by heart. 1 John 4:9 says, "This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him." That we might love through him. 1 John 4:10 says, "This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin." God poured out his love in Jesus so that that love can fill us. So that when Jesus asks us, "Do you truly love me more than these?" because of his love filling us, we can say, "Yes, Lord. At least that's my desire." So today we say again, thank you for the cross, Lord. Thank you for the price you paid, bearing all my sin and shame. In love you came and gave amazing grace. Amazing grace. That grace that transforms you and it transforms me. And Jesus can take our gift of love and transform that into something glorious for the glory of God and for our good. So Jesus, fill us today. Help us to remember what you did so that we could be yours. May our love reach up, and may our love reach out and touch those around us with that good news as well. God bless you today.